Okay, the live stream has started. So, benefits of the live stream. I'm Councillor Philip Davis. I'm chairing this meeting of Licensing and Public Protection Committee today. I advise the meeting to note that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. With declaration of interest, members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and other registrable interests arising for any business to be discussed at this meeting. I draw members' attention to the letter which was sent from the monitoring officer. Every member should have received that in respect of reports, I'll get the numbers right, 10 and 11, private rented sector selective licensing fees and charges, and smaller houses in multiple occupation, additional licence fees and charges. Those are the two new registration schemes that the city is introducing. Now, I am declaring an interest in those. I have a pecuniary interest, so I will have sent myself from the meeting for the two items. And in the absence of the Deputy Chair, who's ill today, Councillor Forsyth is going to chair those two items, if that's okay with the committee. Are we agreed we should proceed in that way? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. If anybody else has an interest in those items, please declare it. Okay, thank you for that. Apologies. We have
very well.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. And minutes of the 18th of January. The minutes. Can we confirm those minutes, please, of the 18th of January? Agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Before I move to the first item proper, we will be altering the item 7 to put it at the end of the agenda so that the Assistant Director Housing, Guy Chaundy, can join us as he's in another meeting at the moment. So that will go to the end of the agenda after the two landlord and housing reports. Okay, so I'd like to ask Tony Quigley to present the hosted illegal money lending team report. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through you, this is a report to update the committee in respect of work that is carried out by the Birmingham City Council hosted England Illegal Money Lending Team. I know the committee will be fully aware that the work of the team from previous reports, and this is an update report really in respect of the work over the last 12 months. And what the team has been doing in respect of tracking down vendors, as well as the financial inclusion work that the team, hosted by Birmingham City Council, takes advantage of all the services within the city that supports the team. So legal services, prosecuting matters for the LPPC for the team, and I propose to go through the report in its entirety, but if I can just draw attention to a few parts of the report for the committee. If we go to 3.13 of the report, there was some research that was done on the team. It was supported by the information the team holds, and as a result of that, the research by the Centre for Social Justice was Swimming with Sharks has concluded that 1.06 million people in England alone are currently using large sharks. This equates to 2% of the population, more than a threefold rise from the previous report that was done in 2000. There are further research reports that are in train at the moment in Germany as a result of that. Reports it's about what the researchers believe is the current position in respect of the number of individuals that may be using illegal lenders. 3.14, typically illegal money lenders, they start out being a friend. They're often heard of by friends. It's only when repayments are missed that their behaviour changes. They offer little or no paperwork. They increase the debt or add additional amounts. They refuse to tell the borrower the interest rate and how much they still owe. And they take items as security, displaying passports, driving licences, bank cards, as well as other valuable items of the family. And as we all know, sometimes they intimidation, threats, or violence. As you've seen from the report, one of the key things about the team is we take a holistic approach in respect of the way we tackle this. So you'll see the team has prosecuted for quite a large number of offences under a significant indictment. Moving on through the report, and the victim contacts, there were 311 contacts with victims in 2020. The team have been offering significant support to those individuals. There have been far more victims involved in some of the cases that we've done. There is more or less a one-to-one support mechanism, and the liaise team offer emotional support and safety advice. But there are also referrals by the officers to other forms of lending, credit unions, housing, debt advice, and mental health services, because we know that being in debt tends to have and then moving on again to 7.4, reason for borrowing. The big one last year was household bills, but we also saw issues around, obviously, the aftermath of the pandemic. As a result of either losing their business or their job. 24% of clients borrowed. Medium amount was about £500. Medium amount repaid off that £500 loan was £400. The lowest amount borrowed was £90 for household bills. And the highest amount was £60,000 for medical expenses. One plan £500. These are the sort of things that we see, throughout. Typical evidence from people who are caught up in this type of another borrowed £300, and in total was paid back over £100,000. Section 14 talks about the funding from IMLT. The IMLT project is currently funded by the Treasury. It's done through a levy on the credit business. The project is obviously through you, Chair of the committee, but also we have an external governance that includes the Financial Conduct Authority, Treasury, housing authorities across including Northern Ireland. For the team is 4.5 million. I can say, Chair, that we've now had confirmation that our budget next year £500,000. In respect to the team, the illegal money lending team is wholly grant funded, and therefore all costs of the service. Any income and proceeds of crime monies are ring fenced to the team, utilised for ongoing work, And there's many examples within the report that provides the proceeds of crime that we take from illegal lenders. The report is an update report, Chair. It's for noting. As I've said, the team is wholly hosted by Birmingham City Council. It's the only team in England that takes on this type of work. There's a team in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Service that supports the team, such as the HR finance, are all involved in making sure that all of the cases that we take are robust and success.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, Councillor Islam?
Oh, thank you, Tony. This is very nice report. I really dive in again. Only two minor questions to clarify. 15 years old charge of money lending and money laundering, which is referred to the code the 20th of February. Is there any outcome? Because it's the beginning of March. So this is my first question. Second one, which is page 16, 4.9. Between January 22 to December 22, the team received 476 reports of illegal money lending across England. How many of this report? How many within Birmingham?
I'll answer how many were in Birmingham because we try and give a sort of global picture nationally. It is about who's prepared to report this, because obviously this is the type of criminality that's very pernicious. So as a result of that, people are very afraid to come forward. And what we wouldn't want to try and do is see how well one area is doing as opposed to another, because it wouldn't give us a true reflection of what's going on in that particular area, because we're so reliant on people coming forward. And all it would mean is that somebody's been brave enough to come forward to talk to the team, rather than this is the number of illegal lenders in Birmingham, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, Councillor, I missed which part of the report.
About the page 50, 4.8, a 51 years old charge for money lending and laundering, which is referred to the code for the 20th of February 23. So this is middle of the March now. Is there any outcome?
Yeah, if it was charged in 2023, the case has been referred to the Crown Court on the 20th of February. I think it's been adjourned, so I can double check and I'll let you know what was said. Whilst it may have gone off the sentencing, unfortunately at the moment, we are at the hands of the court. And so they're dealing with the really serious matters like murder and things like that, and also the quick wins in terms of the easier cases. So we sort of slot in the middle. So some of our cases, for example, are going off to 2020. Well, if there is a result on it, I will get the result for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Forsyth.
Thank you. Can I first of all thank very quickly his team and work that we've seen here. I've certainly noticed on local Facebook groups a much greater awareness of the team's work, and that's to be commended. If anyone doubts the importance of this work, please go and stand in a food bank queue across the city and talk to people who have been caught up in this, because this is real. This is growing and it is directly impacting on people's lives. And we are seeing more and more and more of it. It used to be around September, school uniform time, for Christmas, to tie people over for Christmas. It is now people buying food, having to deal with food poverty. So if anyone doubts the importance of this work and how ordinary people are having to deal with the cost of living crisis, they should read this report and come and stand in a food bank queue, because it's hitting all our citizens across each ward in this city. And any support that we can give this team, really, I encourage people to do that, because the work is invaluable, getting people to come forward. This is evil.
I'd like to echo that. Clearly, the figures don't lie. It's not surprising, in a sense, that this crime is increasing because of the cost of living crisis. But I suppose the good news is that the government's recognising that in terms of the additional financial support, and I think credit where credit's due. I think it's an honour to host this in Birmingham because it does such good work. And the demand, as Councillor Forsyth has observed, is growing. If anything, we'd hope to get to a point where it was declining. Clearly, that's the aim. But while this crime is out there, then we will be there on behalf of not just the citizens of Birmingham, but the citizens of England, doing what we can as a city council to make sure it is stamped out. So I'd like to thank the unit, Tony, everybody involved for all the hard work they're putting into this. And as I say, good news is we're getting more resource to do that. Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Can we note the report? Thank you. Okay, so we've moved the other report down the agenda. So we're on to prosecutions and cautions, which is the usual information report from the director. Do you want to say anything? No. Essentially, you've got the usual information there. If you have any questions on particular prosecutions or cautions, please pursue those with the officers. Chair.
Item 6.
Oh, have I missed 6 out? Sorry, yes, you're quite right. Yes, you're quite right. Can we deal with 8 though first, as I made that mistake? Is there any? Note 8. So can we note 8? Is that all right? Okay, yes, thank you. Sorry for that. Yes, it should be the National Training Standards Regional Investigations Team. So Tony again, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a report that is noted by the committee. The committee again oversee a further team that is hosted by Birmingham City Council, investigation team that is funded through the National Training Standards Service. The team operates across 14 local authorities, which is the 7 metropolitan authorities and then the surrounding authorities. And they deal with what would be considered to be higher level criminality where there is cross-border activity. So they will be looking at frauds, rogue traders, that's people that knock on the door and then take thousands of pounds for changing a few roof tiles, and dealing with potential issues that arise from road companies that set up just to take thousands of pounds off of people. So this particular team has been set and dealing with a number of regional issues, but it's also been given a national issue to deal with, which was around counterfeit products, both online as well as across various markets. They've been very successful in respect of the investigations they're doing. There are a number of trials that are coming up this year. One of the factories that they closed down, part of Operation Pure Man, the owner of the factory got 4 years that then was later reduced. It is a team again that under your jurisdiction of governance, and it's a way of us to highlight the work to the community the last 12 months. So.
Thank you very much. Any comments on the report? Again, sorry, Councillor? No. Sorry, again, it's very valuable work that we're doing here as the City Council, hosting this particular team as well. Presumably, Tony, with the cost of living crisis, is there an impact on the degree of counterfeiting that's going on? Is there a relationship with those cost issues?
Well, I think there's quite a significant issue with counterfeits that are I think previously there used to be an idea that those that were being ripped off in essence within themselves. Because actually, there's been a number of different reports around counterfeiting and the impact it has in terms of investment into areas, but also in respect of more organised crime groups that get involved in it. I think one of the key things here is that having to use counterfeit products, but they knew it was counterfeit, but they may well buy it. Quite dangerous, certainly around phone charges, a big issue where they were potentially, there's a real issue with it. You're looking for a bargain, and with the cost of living crisis. So, our message is still the same, which is generally don't do something if they can. There's always that difficult the answer to your question, Chair.
Yes.
It's a different relation to address. Because it's
Okay. I mentioned this as well, Tony.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've seen the high-profile cases with raids and so on, even in the city, haven't we? But presumably there is an international link here.
There is, Chair. One of the issues is the importation of the goods. The raids numbers, but they're also coming in arms. So in essence, you'll get labels that separately. Item it looks like it's just a product that's coming in, and then they apply the labels in a factory. Factories that have gone into what you see. Living in the factory, you see people there that have got no income because they've been brought over a debt, and then they're made to work that debt off factory. It's quite significant sort of things that.
Any other comments or questions, colleagues? No? Thank you very much then. Thank you for the report. Can we note the report, please? Agreed? Thank you. Right, so again, if you have anything on prosecutions and cautions, number 8, you can raise that now, but I think as again, it's the usual one for noting. We've noted that report. To highway and registration services fees and charges addendum, and Kamyar Solly is here to talk about that, and then Mark Croxford, I think you're going to deal with the registration items there.
In reverse order.
All right, so you want to do that? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Committee will recall that in January 2023 we brought the division's fees and charges report, and there was a couple of minor areas which I apologise for, which we seek to address here. What I'll deal with is the report that corrects the error around the room bookings, which was identified the initial booking. We have some highways to do with the highways report. So, Chair, what we've done is we've redone the table. It looks like it's an error that's been going on for a little while, and it's now being sort of stabilised. So, we're looking for if they were to approve that.
Okay. Are we happy to approve the fees table? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you.
Okay, and that's a carry.
6 of the report sets out the projects relating to highways. Effectively, if a developer needs to work over around highways, they need to apply for a license. The report sets out the license structure of what we use. We use Highways Act 1983 and the fees and charges that, excuse me, we have set out in the report reflect extra charged about the 5% on top budget. Just as a way of background, in terms of determining our fees and charges, we also looked at our neighbouring authorities to benchmark what we charge against the services that they provide. And effectively, there is a good deal of comparison between what we do and what the other authorities do. So there's no difference in terms of service overall. So really, I think on just moving with the services that previously and we added 5% in last year.
So the rate then is about half the rate of inflation.
It is about half the rate of inflation, what's the standard rate that has been used throughout for other fees and charges.
We may not recoup all our costs, but the aim is to try and fund the budget.
Well, we certainly with the budget, we will be able to cover our costs and the resources that we employ.
Yeah. Any questions? If not, yes, please do. Yeah.
Apologise for touching out on paragraph 2.2 of the appendix 6. I do apologise, it wasn't picked up by us, and that actually should read specific licenses under the legislation are delivered by the council's provider, a service by the council's interim service provider here.
Okay.
If I may give this change.
Yes, we'll accept that as an amendment to the report. Is that okay? Agreed? Yes. And we need to approve the table, Appendix 6A. Thought we'd already done that.
It's the highways table.
The highways table, yeah, that's right. We've approved the building licence fees already, because you asked us to do that, yeah. So we're now looking at the big table, Appendix 6A. So,
was this the missing appendix from last? That's me.
That's
from the previous, that you would have had before, yeah.
you haven't seen.
No. Okay, so that's the new table. So are you happy to approve this table? Agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you. That is approved. And the report as a whole accepted? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Ben. Right. So now I need to hand over the chair, having declared an interest in reports at 10 and 11. So I'll ask Councillor Forsyth to take the chair and I'll absent myself from the committee. But if somebody would come and let me know when you've finished, I'd be grateful. Rubbish out of the way.
Just introduce myself for the webcam. I'm Councillor Sam Forsyth and I'd be chairing items 10 and 11 on today's agenda. If you go to item 10, please. which is the private rented sector selective licensing fees and charges for 2023 and 2024. If I could ask the Director, Sir Julian Nasir, to present the report, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Forsyth. This report relates to selective licensing fees and charges. As you will all be aware, this is our private rented licensing scheme that we will introduce from the 5th of June. And as such, we need to formalise the fees for those licences. At point 1, particular 25 wards that will be affected are outlined, and any landlord of a self-contained private rented property where the house is not a house of multiple occupation will require a selective licence subject to exemptions that are in the regulations for that property. Any houses that are in multiple occupation, that's where they're shared accommodation, the 2 or more households, will either require a mandatory licence or additional licence. So I just want to be clear that you only need 1 licence if you're in that 25 wards, and it is dependent on the occupancy of the rented property. So if it's occupied by a single household, then it's a selective licence that would and will apply. In setting our fees, we consider the council must ensure that we recoup the costs of the licensing scheme, and that is a ring-fenced budget where basically the income over the 5-year period of the scheme matches the expenditure that the council has put in for administrating the licensing scheme, ensuring compliance and ensuring enforcement of the scheme. At point 5, we've clarified who would need to hold the licence, and it would be the landlord or someone that would manage the property on their behalf, but it has to be a named person. That licence holder has to be a fit and proper person, and at section 5.2 we articulate the sorts of things that we would consider in determining whether somebody is fit and proper, whether they've got previous relevant convictions, especially relating to violence, sexual offences, drugs or fraud, whether they've broken any laws relating to housing or landlord and tenant issues, and whether they've been found guilty, for instance, of unlawful discrimination. So we've qualified there to demonstrate to people the sorts of things that we would take account of. They're not everything we would take out of, they are merely a description of the sorts of things that they're not exclusive, shall I say. Appendix 1 shows the proposed fees and charges that we will ask you to consider, and you will note that they're split into a non-refundable application fee and a licence fee, and that is due to case law that we've had previously, and I know you'll all be familiar on relating to all of our licence fees. The duration of the licence, longer than a 5-year period, given that is the length of time which we've had approval from the Department of Levelling Up for our selective licensing designation. And it would be our intent to issue for that 5-year period, but there could be potential for us to limit the duration of the licence to a 1-year licence. And at 7.1, we articulate the scenarios in which we might consider that to be made, and again that is based on significant case law and matters taken to the upper tribunal in relation to housing matters. That there are points in time when we might want to reduce duration of a licence where we have specific concerns about any issues. You'll see at point 8 that we refer to our previous consultation on selective licensing and the fee. But the fee that we propose in this report is 700. That is because of concerns that there would be insufficient resources for enforcement of the scheme, and therefore there's a variation of £30 to the £700 that we propose in the process here. Implications for resources, as I said, that the budget for selective licensing is completely ring-fenced, and hence the cost will have no impact on the council, and our budget resources and be funded through the process of the licence fees. We can and will be reviewing the licence fees every year, so they could potentially change in the period of the 5-year designation. But we've calculated them as best we can on our projected costs and in accordance with best practice. There is no statutory methodology for setting fees. We are the work and the licensing scheme that will be entailed with selective licences. At Appendix 1, you can see the total licence fee, the application fee and the fee on approval, and other fees in relation to, changing licence holder, for example, or the application being withdrawn by the applicant. I'm sure you've all had a chance to read that at your leisure. Appendix 2 refers to relevant case law, of which there is considerable, and Appendix 3 again refers to the specific parts under the Housing Act to which the licensing scheme is designated, and again a bit of case law about the upper tribunal there. So I would ask members to consider our recommendation, which is that the selective licensing fees and charges at Appendix 1 be approved with effect from the 1st of April for any licensing commencing on or
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive and very detailed report set out there. Colleagues, do you have any comments or observations, Councillor Pritchard?
Thank you, Chair. So, a few questions, if I may. And actually, a lot of them are kind of about both items, because I was kind of doing compared them as reading. So, my first question is, the fee levels that have been set across both, has it taken account of the increased costs in terms of staff, in terms of the pay settlements that are being around nationally at the moment for councils? And are you confident that the staff cost increase will be covered by the fee? So that's my first question. In the additional licensing report, there is a list of circumstances where the varying of the license doesn't incur a fee, and yet in the selective, that's not there. So my question was, what happens in the selective licensing if there's a varying of the fee like there is listed in additional? Is it no fee, or is it in the selective case there would be a fee? So what would it be? So if you look at the table in Appendix 1 of the selective report, it just says license variation is to go by the council, no fee, and change of license holder standard fee. But in the equivalent in the other report, it says change of license holder standard fee, variation of license, bullet points, no fee, and then license variation is to go by the council, no fee. So that kind of middle row, those three rows I've just talked about, doesn't exist in the report. And so I was just kind of clarifying what happens in that circumstance, and why it's not there. I'm sure there's a good reason just to clarify that. And I also noticed the difference in the fees between the two. So for additional licensing, the total is £55 more, but conversely, Part A was £50 less and Part B was £105 more. So I was just again wondering what accounts for the difference in total and the fact that they're the other way around, if that makes sense, in terms of the fee levels. And final question, are we sure that setting the licence fee from the maximum that the council can gives the council enough oversight, and that giving somebody a licence for 5 years is enough accountability and oversight, and that things aren't going to go wrong with that licence holder or the premises in the meantime? So, apologies for the question, but that's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. Can I defer to Ms Nasser to deal with those three matters that you've raised? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard. Firstly, in terms of the cost of living rises, the fees that we set were obviously based upon our consultation exercise that we previously did. So it hasn't taken into account the any significant cost of living rise. In terms of the council's own staff and where the bulk of the costs come from, which are basically salary costs, actually the salaries of our staff haven't gone up that significantly. So the pay award for this financial year, for instance, was 1,800 across every grade. So that hasn't been taken into account. Obviously, there may well be a pay award, and there will be of some kind for the next financial year, and we will have to potentially go back and have a look at the fee, which is why I referred to that we can, in the lifetime of the scheme, and we should, on a yearly basis, review the scheme. So it could be possible that some people have a licence at one cost and some people have a licence at another cost, but we would obviously have to bring that fee back to LPPC to ask you to consider the reasons for that variation to the fee. So, yeah, that's a position that we currently have. In terms of the variation in the costs, I will actually have to look at this in more detail in terms of comparing the selective to the additional licensing. There is behind this all a very, very complex Excel spreadsheet, which is obviously not included here. But what I would say is that if we haven't actually specified a fee, we cannot charge a fee for it. So if we have accident missed a fee, we would have to come back and put that to LPPC, designate what we thought that fee should be.
So in effect, small variations where they're not listed would effectively be no fee like they are with the report because it's not been listed. That would be the position.
Where it's not been listed, it can't be substituted. It has to come back to the committee for approval.
Yeah, and in terms of small variations, our view is that there is no fee. So we listened to the consultation where specific representation was made to us by the National Residential Landlords Association, NRLA, where they actually entered into quite a detailed conversation, I'm aware of it, about variation fees. And we agreed that the appropriate thing was not to have variation fee, and hence that's why that is reflected in Appendix 1 of the next report. Although it isn't specified in Appendix on the selective licensing fee,
material is the same.
Yeah. Exactly. And the last thing that you raised, Councillor Pritchard, to believe, is in the difference in the setting of the application fee. Obviously, the processes that we use and the software we will use will enable us, hopefully, to look at the application efficiently, and the information that we've asked for, no doubt in the calculation, it gives an ability to look at the additional licensing application more efficiently than the selective licensing. Right. I would have to drill down to find the exact reasons for that, and I don't have that at hand, but I can explain why the Part B fee is greater on additional licensing, and that will be because we envisage, because of the nature of the occupancy, which is a multiple occupied premises, that more resources will need to be dedicated into compliance issues and enforcement issues, whereas a single occupancy property, we're expecting that to be less resource intensive.
I did have the final question about what 5 years was enough of oversight and
duration.
Shorter period would offer more accountability and more oversight of those licenses and properties.
Yes, 5 years is the standard fee, and we're obviously trying to minimise costs for landlords in terms of renewal of the licence, and therefore And we work very much throughout regulation and enforcement on a risk-based analysis, and therefore, if we see that a property are managed, where a compliance visit is included in every 5-year licence. There are no issues that reason we should think not to grant a 5-year licence. That's when we will grant it. Obviously, we have got the remit there to grant a 1-year licence if, on application or on pursuance of the landlord to apply, we have concerns, we grant a 1-year licence. And also, in terms of planning issues where we do have these, sometimes these planning anomalies, as they're two regulated regimes which are working in tandem but are completely separate.
Thank you. This is a major change. So I'm very grateful for those explanations and clarifications. Do any other colleagues have any questions, observations or remarks they wish to make in relation to this particular item?
Welcome. Thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. We can see that the recommendation is to approve the fees that set out in Appendix 1 in relation to selective licensing. Do we approve? Agreed? Thank you. Can we move to item 11? Obviously, there's been an overlap between these two items because they both deal with houses in multiple occupation. But again, if I can invite Sajila Nasir to present the report in relation to this specific area. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report relates to smaller houses in multiple occupation. I won't go into in as much detail as the selective licensing report, but what I would explain is whereas selective licensing covered 25 wards of the city, additional licensing, our proposal for that covers the whole of the city and all of its wards. This licence fee relates to what we would call smaller houses in multiple occupation. As members will be aware, larger houses in multiple occupation, and those are premises which are occupied by 5 or more occupants forming 2 or more households. Those are already subject to a mandatory licensing scheme which is set out in statute. In multiple occupation which have 3 or 4 occupants forming 2 or more households are not covered presently by a licensing scheme. We have Cabinet has approved that scheme to commence on the 5th of June, the same date as the commencement of selective licensing, and these are the fees that relate to that scheme. And you will find them again at Appendix 1, and I know we have spoken to them, and I would ask you to consider those and hopefully at 2.1 approve those for adoption.
Thank you. As everyone can see from 4.1 in the report, this applies citywide where HMOs are not already covered. So this is a significant change. And can I thank Sajila Nasir for the work that she's done. Do any colleagues have any comments or questions in relation to this or any remarks they wish to make? Councillor Pritchard?
Yeah, it's welcome, but I think I understood correctly from the report. If a property is in the 25 wards but is an HMO, it will still put the additional licensing scheme, not the selective. That's correct.
3 licensing schemes across the city, mandatory for larger HMOs, additional for smaller HMOs, and then for the 25 wards selective. So if you're in the 25, you will need either selective licence, a mandatory licence, which you should already have, or an additional. So it's just one licence, and it will depend on the occupancy of the property.
But that's the hierarchy. You need a mandatory. If you don't need that, then you need an additional. And if you don't need that, then you would need a selective. Is that?
For the 25 wards, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Knowles?
So last night I was at a meeting about homeless Ukraine, and one of the difficulties that Ukraine families are having about is whether households could mean, that property.
Obviously, we consider any occupancy on its merits and their very particular circumstances, and we don't envisage that every single property is going to be clear cut, and we're going to work and develop this as the schemes progress. But in the scenario you've just given, yes, it would become. Yeah, it may also become a mandatory HMO depending upon the level of occupancy. So I'm quite happy to join up with any other part of the council that you're discussing this with, so that we can feed in our expertise and find solutions.
I thank you, Councillor Knowles, for raising that, because it raises a new issue. And obviously, as people are moving forward, there will be other scenarios, and it's very much a work in progress, and we have to develop the matter. So thank you for raising that, and I'm sure it will be taken back and there'll be some feedback given in relation to it. Does anybody else have any points that they wish to raise? Any questions? No, thank you. Can I invite you please to approve the recommendation that we have for the fee set out in Appendix 1 in relation to these properties? Thank you, very much obliged. I'm now going to ask if the Chair, Phil Davis, to come back. And I shall step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Councillor Forsyth for chairing those items. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the deferred item on unauthorised encampments. Now, Guy Chaundy was going to join us from housing. Oh yes, good. Okay. I didn't see you there. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have the cast here, and also Ewan Van Han, Planning Policy Manager, is here. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for coming. So we have everybody we need. That's good. So Mark Croxford is going to introduce this. Mark.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the regular update that Committee received, Chair, on unauthorised encampments within the city. And as per your last request, I think it was back in January, we have invited you and Guy, who are colleagues within the local authority. And what I propose to do is just run through the background and some updates from the position of environmental health. Then invite you and then Guy to speak, and then we'll hand it back for. As you're aware, the local authority from time to time has to deal with unauthorised encampments. They're not illegal encampments, they are unauthorised. And we work quite closely with police and their memorandum of understanding to actually manage those unauthorised encampments. Sometimes when we undertake the welfare checks, there are reasons why those unauthorised encampments need to stay, and other times we would be looking to evict, usually from an eviction point of view. Eviction. We've opened transit sites within the city. The idea behind the transit sites is we can provide all the welfare needs from a site, and it's much better than using the parks, which are a shared facility, and not just giving over to one community. The moment the operational site that we have in the city is at Proctor Street, and that's been operating since the 1st of November 2020. It has been successful. It has led to protecting a number of parks around the city and reducing the number of unauthorised encampments in the community. But we have noted quite a significant problem around COVID, where a number of these transit sites across the region, so across the West Midlands, were being used and not paid for. At that stage, there was no. We've had significant problems in trying to bring those back into regularised use, and I'm actually asking people that are using the sites to undertake. Unauthorised encampment on our Proctor Street site was in January 23, and again we had to evict there because there was no regularised use. And where we have 1.8 FTEs within regulation and enforcement, we take the evictions. That's Billy Dave. They do have other roles as well, but the role that they can't fulfil is the managing on a tenancy. It just isn't something that's within their scope of experience. We have had but the identification and bringing forward of the sites is a matter for the Inclusive Growth Directorate. I'm old, that's planning. My apologies. So Inclusive Growth Directorate look at that, and they do assessments through the Birmingham Development Plan, and they also do a GTAA, which is an assessment. In addition, we've been advised that the operational provision and use of the sites and the managing of the tenancy for those sites is a matter for the House. That's why we're now trying to put this combined report together. It is still available. It hasn't been developed as yet. It is a much smaller site. It only has 4 pitches, but I'll go on to describe that. In addition to that, can't talk too much about Tameside Drive, but we have been pushing with that to try and recognise the tenancy on that site and bring it back into use. And I can report that there is an active conversation now on that in the next. At section 5, we've got the number of unauthorised encampments in the city. You can see that where it goes from 132 on the darker lines to 89, 5.1 on the graph. So that's where partway through the year we opened the transit site, and you can see that there was a significant reduction in the number of unauthorised encampments. And the figures have then fallen quite significantly. That's where COVID came. And that's mainly because there wasn't much in the way of movements around, and a lot of the unauthorised encampments were actually staying for a long period of time on Proctor Street. So we only had one unauthorised encampment effectively, and it's only when they had another encampment that became one. They're staying for greater periods of time. Some of those encampments were there for 4 months. What we are noting is in 2022-2023, the numbers are increasing. We're up to 76. We have seen more activity in the parks, and we're very keen to get back to working with our police colleagues to use Section 62s and to direct people to the transit site, or indeed just have them go to the transit site directly when they enter into the city. The consequence of opening the transit site is that we have reduced the pressure in the wider community, so less people are experiencing unauthorised encampments. In that sense, I think it has been a success. However, the pressure on the community within Natures has increased, and we are working with the local council and the local MP on a plan. From somebody's point of view, as a local authority environmental health officer, it would be great if we had a number of these sites where we could actually move and open and close the sites so that they could be moved around. I think it would also be better if they were permanently managed, albeit that when they're not open, the people who are managing the site are talking to housing on that site. The strategic management of the sites. Currently, we have 6.4. There's an identification from the accommodation assessment that the city does require permanent pitches. The GTAA in 2019 identified by 2023 we should have 15 pitches. 2033. As I'm aware, there was no completions identified. The GTAA has also identified the number of trends accommodated by both Proctor Street and Aston Brook Street being brought online and Tameside Drive being brought back into use. Idea of the sort of size of the sites. Right, I'll stop here and I'll invite Ewan to just do an update from planning. I think you guys.
So as Mark has said, planning's role is to identify the level of need and then the type of need for travellers, which is done through the Gypsy and Travellers Accommodation Assessment. And then we're also responsible for identifying suitable sites to meet that need and then allocating sites in the local plan to meet a 5-year supply of that need and setting out a policy which sets out the criteria for assessing any additional sites that come forward. And we also approve or consider planning applications that come forward for Gypsy and Traveller development. The current Birmingham development plan allocated Aston Brook Street and Proctor Street as Gypsy and Traveller sites, and Mark has already given an update on that. And now we know that is outdated, and we've started the process of preparing a new local plan for Birmingham, which will replace the Birmingham development plan that was adopted in 2017. And the new GTAA will provide an up-to-date picture of the current provision and activity in the city. It will assess future need, covering the new plan period, which is to 2042. It will provide a breakdown of that need for the appropriate time periods. It will set out the amount and type of accommodation required to meet that need. For example, permanent pitches, private and socially rented, transit pitches, temporary stopping sites, travelling show people plot requirements, houseboat dweller, mooring requirements, or bricks and mortar housing. And it will also look at the data on unauthorised encampment and the need for transit provision. And if possible, it would give an indication of the broad locations of where additional pitches and sites, if required, are needed. So that this assessment will involve a desktop study, stakeholder consultation, and household surveys of the gypsies and travellers in the area. And the consultant team will conduct interviews with all the households residing in all types of accommodation within the study area. And we're hoping to appoint the consultant within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So as the study is going on, we will continue our search for sites that are potentially suitable for gypsy and traveller needs. And so far we've focused our efforts on council-owned land because that is within our control, and we've identified a number of sites potentially suitable. We've set up a working group with colleagues in Birmingham Property Services who will be a key player in this, given that the sites are in council ownership. And through that group, we hope to narrow down the list of sites in terms of their availability and deliverability. And then completion of the GTAA will then inform how many pitches are required. And then we will propose the sites in the local plan preferred options document, which is scheduled for consultation in October this year. And so that will then allow the general public, local residents, and any other interested parties to comment on these sites. There's also nothing stopping a private landowner from proposing their land as a gypsy and traveller sites, and we would then assess the suitability of that according to our selection criteria. And just a bit about the selection criteria, it would be in accordance with national guidance on planning policy for traveller sites. And the detail of that is set out in national policy and includes such things as, not locating sites in areas of flood risk, have to be sustainably located, reduce the need for long distance travel and potentially any environmental damage. Also have to take into consideration noise and air quality, issues in terms of the site to protect the health and well-being of its any travellers, ensure that children can attend school on a regular basis. So there are certain criteria that we will have to follow when selecting the most appropriate sites.
Thank you very much for that. Perhaps, Chorley, can you come in on the work of housing, please?
The first thing I want to say is that I think there's an acceptance from us, apologies, in terms of the previous issues around finding on ground management of these sites. And I think, you know, that's been borne out by some of the things that Mark said about some of the damage, etc. There's probably been an over-reliance on Mark's team and Bill and Dave in terms of picking up some of those day-to-day things. We've kind of identified some resources over the last few months to try and take forward these issues, but that's not yet achieved, that dedicated management function within the service. What we kind of are really focused on now is developing a real strong business case that will allow us to occupy. At the moment, we don't have, you know, dedicated resources outside of the housing revenue account. So we're taking through a business case as part of the project plan to bring in. I tried previously to look at different ways of bringing in specialist type, because there's a special skill, as Mark will testify, in terms of managing this type of provision that isn't aligned to managing a normal housing tenancy. We went out to procurement some time ago to see if there were organisations out there. We've looked to see if we could do it through the procurement for the enforcement agents, and we even approached other local authorities to see what management. Those have all been unsuccessful, so the business case is going to be pulled together. That's not to say that nothing's going to happen now. So we've got resources that are working with Mark's team and working with planning. We've got, we've actually worked quite well together over recent years on this issue. But that key piece of the jigsaw has been that dedicated management resource that can do the day-to-day. In terms of some of the issues around the embedding both a tenancy agreement, collecting money, etc., there's been some complexities around that. Working through. We've got, as I say, this action plan has been developed. We've met with local ward members and gone through that, and the local MP at Proctor Street, because of the issues that are really prevalent at Proctor Street. Just on Proctor Street. That site, however, was leading to damage. The welfare block, possibly beyond. So we've got a surveyor out there, he's either been angry, going out to do a full survey on the site. Mark's mentioned Tameside Drive. Tameside, along with Aston Brook Street, was subject to a grant application to Homes England to identify some grant money to support bringing sites forward. Obviously, Tameside is very much subject to us having the agreement with the current occupiers agreed to allow us to do that. The site at Aston Brook Street, unfortunately, was rejected. We are currently talking to Homes England about the reasonableness of some of the requirements they've put on that, because as Mark said, it's a 4-pitch site. And they were talking about shower blocks and quite a considerable amount of works for a site of 4 pitches, so which wasn't included in our original specification. So I think moving forward, I think, yes, there's been an acceptance. We've now, previously it was just me, I've now got other officers that are now working directly with Mark's team to try and develop this action plan, get the business cases through, get dedicated resources identified. Until that happens. Day-to-day management process.
Thank you very much for those reports. Colleagues, questions, comments?
How many pitches are there at Proctor Street?
16 performing pitches.
Yeah.
The most number of caravans we've had on the site is 25. Which was, and we have been placing customers. It's just a total.
We have a very limited number of sites, and currently very more limited because of the problems of management of the site. Then, effectively,
Yeah. So we've got viable site and we've got an identified site through the Birmingham Development Plan, which is one at Aston Brook Street, which could take further for subject to how much of a welfare block. You guys quite rightly identified if we put in a very sizable welfare block, we might only be able to put one or two vans on it, because that would question whether it's worth bringing forward. We haven't been on to the Tameside Drive one. That's been occupied currently by the same family for about 20 years. Looking at they will see a permanent pitch on that site and transit provision. We think again we're looking at something in the region of 10 to 16 pitches on that site.
it seems a very limited number. Even if we got to 36, I don't know who I'm competing with here. It's probably outside on the building side, isn't it? We'd still, in the best scenario, we'd have 36 pitches, which still seems quite a limited number given the scale of the city and knowing what I know about unauthorised encampments, because this happens in Bilsey Ward quite often and it's happened in other wards. We really need quite a bit more capacity. Would that be fair?
It's identified through the GTAA, so I'll let you come back in on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the updated GTAA will refresh that that needs assessment, and I think it's obvious that the need is greater than what was identified in the Birmingham Development Plan at the time that was prepared. So the need has increased over the years.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes we direct unauthorised encampments to Proctor Street. Not all of them have gone. What it does do is it means they can't stay anywhere else on the site.
I mean, that's the key issue, isn't it? That it allows us to exercise our legal powers or to get the police to intervene. And that has been crucial, as we know. So I'm pleased to hear about the process which is going on in planning and housing. And I do appreciate the difficulties you face in that you've got to get the resource lined up. But clearly this is quite urgent in terms of Proctor Street, isn't it? I see you nodding there, so that's welcome from housing. In terms of the planning process, clearly we know this takes a long time, but you are moving in terms of this process. Is any part of the city off limits in respect of the criteria you apply?
As I've set out, there are selection criteria, and we will follow national guidance in terms of choosing the most appropriate sites. So, yeah, environmental constraints like flood risk areas, level 3, for example, green belt, areas that are heavily constrained, or other issues in terms of environmental constraints like noise or air quality issues. So yeah, they need to be in sustainable locations, as how we would treat any other kind of residential accommodation.
Because having visited the Proctor Street site, it just seems it's neutral, so it's very industrialised, or it's very built up, it's very urbanised. Yet we do have lots of open space in the city, other than parks, which is obviously the point with the unauthorised encampment. So it seems to me, when you say green belt is excluded, So that that's not possible then for a particular site.
Well, under the current Birmingham Development Plan, which protects the green belt, and national policy which protects green belt, but yeah, that is currently a big policy constraint in terms of the location of new development. Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot.
You've also got a lot of companies, business people, and that they buy land and sit on it, land banking, and whether it's suitable. And I think the most important thing as well is to have not only elected member consultation, but also the people that live in the area too, because it's important to them to have their opinion. It's not wanting to sort of say, well, the NIMBYs, but it's people living together.
That's a drink. Yes.
Thank you, Jay. Education and like detached playing fields. Has there been any changes to them?
Normally, is section 77 is it related to allow development in town price. Is that staying the same?
Because you, like for instance, if we were applying for the village green, right, they can't develop that land until the section 77 is, been agreed.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that still the same?
I can't answer with complete surety, but yeah, I'd have to take that one away and come back to you, because I don't know the details of the section 77. But yeah, I'd have to come back to you on that.
For one, I would appreciate a further briefing about the scope of the review. So if we could arrange that, that would be.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the explanations today.
That's all right.
Anybody wants to raise? Sorry, yes,
Just to clarify, so Mark, your report, you said that there was no permanent site. If I understood. Yeah. And yeah, there was supposed to be some in place by now, even according to the Birmingham Development Plan, which has been said is probably inadequate anyway in terms of some of the sites. So, apologies for this, but I haven't heard what is being kind of done to address that, even within the current assessment of what's needed, and as we've identified, that's not enough. So in terms of that permanent provision, as you mentioned Tameside Drive briefly, but other than that, is there anything else? And the other thing is timelines. So you've mentioned here that it's kind of slow, takes a long time. It'd be helpful to have kind of timelines for when Proctor Street will be operating properly in terms of a block and staff and management. So when can we expect that to be the case? When can we expect Aston Brook to be in place if it is going to be possible? I know the issues there. And likewise with Tameside Drive, because to a certain extent I've heard this before, that I would just need to sort this out and this out, and you kind of seem the same position we were in kind of 2 or 3 years ago to a certain extent. So I certainly find it helpful to have timelines of almost project plan. If I get this sort of hit, because it seems to be in a similar position that we were roughly thereabouts that we have been for a couple of years. And final question on the planning side of things. You're saying in terms of identifying sites within the new Birmingham local plan, if somebody makes an application for a site and it's not one of the identified sites, would it be likely to be approved or rejected? In this case, or is it like any other development where it'll be taken on its own merits or the planning board is not? Frames. What happens if you get an application that's outside of the identified sites? And yeah, what more is being done about the permanent project?
Timeline one, because I refer to an action plan, so I'll come through you, Chair, to share that action plan. Make sure it does have some key lines, and obviously have to come back to you next. Some timelines for you to monitor on. And I know on the permanent provision, and then you can come in. So, somebody who's doing planning will be working closely. He's spent considerable amounts of hours, hasn't he, Martin, in terms of trawling across the city, in terms of trying to identify these additional pieces of land, specifically, as well to meet that permanent provision. We're hopeful that Tameside will give an element of that, but that will only accommodate existing permanent provision. But we know there's additional permanent provision, so further work's needed, I think, in trawling through those sites to see if there's.
Yes. So just because a site isn't allocated specifically for Gypsy and Traveller needs doesn't mean that it's precluded from development for that need. So policy TP34 in the Birmingham Development Plan does say it allocates the two sites, Proctor Street and Aston Brook Street, and then it says other proposals for accommodation for gypsies and travellers will be permitted where, and then there's a criteria-based policy where it meets all these criteria. So yeah, that answers the question. Yeah.
Much.
Yes,
Councillor.
Yeah. You explained the difference between size and
A transit site is somewhere people can stop, a bit like the caravan club. So people stop for a period of time. Across the West Midlands, the average maximum stay is 4 weeks. Permanent site is the same. People wish to stay, but they will be on that site there. So we have one which is owned in the city. So the main facility there. Yes, it may stay for years. There isn't a set amount of time for the transit site. Interesting conversations we have with one of your colleagues from legal. We need to be fair. As I say, the average time frame across the Westminster section 4 weeks. We're not so ready to the 4 weeks, but it's a continuum. We can say that a year and 2 years is wrong, but whether it's a week or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, we're not too sure where the bottom end of the continuum is. So we're actively trying to identify that. We're working with our colleague Hilary McPherson in legal, and we're doing the quality assessment to try and determine that. But I suspect it will come out nearer to 4 weeks with a maximum of 3 stops in any given year. So it'd be 12 weeks in total. Any one of 4 weeks, but around quality assessment.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anything else people want to ask? So what I suggest we do is, given the offer of further reports, we have the next in-person meeting provisionally in the diary for the 28th of June. That'll be subject to annual council agreeing all the dates, of course. But we could be good to have another report for the June 28th meeting with housing and planning here. So that we can just. Thank you very much for the update. So that's very helpful. That's given us a clearer view of the process. I can see you are attempting to move this forward. I know it's not easy. And it will take time, but if we can have another report on 28th, I think that'll be helpful. That's fine. So can we accept the report? Thank you very much. And I thank you for coming along to the meeting. Thank you. So I think that is those are the reports today. Date and time of next meeting. We've got penciled in the 19th of April for an online meeting, so we'll be in touch with you about that. But as I say, future dates currently subject to the decision of the council meeting, but 28th of June is one to note for the moment. I've had no urgent business notified to me. So I move to item 14 and move in an urgent situation between meetings, the chair jointly with the relevant chief officer has authority to act on behalf of the committee. Can we agree that? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. And again, my thanks to Councillor Forsyth for stepping in for those two items. And that is the business of the meeting. Thank you very much, colleagues.